Gasp. Switch. Okay, nope, it's not gonna work. We're gonna have to switch the scene myself. How's it going? Happy Wednesday. Glad to see all of you again. I was off last week, celebrated my birthday, which was nice. I'm excited for tonight's stream. I'll fill in some fluff for a few minutes, but one of the reasons I'm really excited about this one is we're finally trying out this little thing, which is JetBrains Projector. So if y'all are unfamiliar with what JetBrains Projector is it's basically a solution. I mean, the short answer is it's a solution to running JetBrains IDEs in the cloud, and then rendering those IDEs either in a browser or in the native client that JetBrains makes. So I am using the native client. This might not look like it to you all, but this is effectively kind of like a browser running Android Studio. It's actually running on a virtual machine that I set up in Google Cloud, but it's the real IDE. The way it works from a technical standpoint, I guess, is because IntelliJ is made using Java Swing, there's some way to render Java Swing apps in the browser, and so you can run the IntelliJ IDE in the cloud, render it in the browser, and then use it wherever you go. So 2 weeks ago we had the stream just broke in the middle, basically. We started dropping a bunch of frames, everything just went terribly, and I assumed it was because, even though I have a pretty good laptop, it was just overloaded with running the IDE and Chrome and streaming, etc. So I looked into this as a solution to maybe if I can offload all of the IDE work, then hopefully we don't have that happen on streams anymore. And actually, according to Streamlabs, which this is actually ridiculous if it's true, but it's telling me I have 0% dropped frames, and I've never actually seen that while streaming before. So that's really fascinating. Hopefully we have crisp audio, crisp video throughout the whole stream, and we should still have the same performance from the IDE. I even have USB debugging set up. The way that works, if you're curious, is basically having to SSH onto the machine using a certain port number that connects ADB, so now I can run an APK from a completely different computer onto my own device. That's not really the point of tonight's stream. I will probably be working on blog posts and a video to show you all how I set that up, but it was really cool and I just wanted to brag about it. Also, we might have better performance because I updated Mac OS, so some of you might recognize the Big Sur background. Yeah, that's me. No one wants to post any updates in chat, but I hope y'all had a good 2 weeks. Hope everyone's doing well. But let's talk about what we are going to do tonight. Yes, let's see how it performs. Hopefully well. Just a kind of a disclaimer about that is I've just been excited to have set this up and been able to run an app on my phone, but I haven't sat here and tried to build a feature using Projector, so I'm a little curious to see if there's any nuances in my workflow that I'm gonna find while we're doing the stream. Occasionally I have a couple weird issues with some keyboard shortcuts, specifically the copy and paste sometimes, but it will be fun to work those out. Also, of course, Projector is in sort of a early stage still, but JetBrains is open to feedback, so if I do come across any bugs, I'll try to go report them later. I've tried, so I think this is a problem even when running my own IDE. I don't know if I can change the font size of this window, but I did bump up the font size within the text files themselves, so hopefully y'all find this readable when we start coding, but as always, let me know if there's anything I can do to make this easier for you all to follow. So this app, if y'all are unfamiliar with the one that I have on screen, I think 3 weeks ago we did a Jetpack Compose code along where we wanted to build one of the Android Dev Challenge apps. So we built this one called Bloom, and it's not really a fully functional app, it's just a bunch of static screens actually. We have this welcome button, like create account doesn't actually do anything, but if you log in, that takes you to a login screen. And you can type some stuff in here. You can type in a password, but we don't even do any input validation. You click login, and then we go to this home screen. And it just shows you a list of plants and stuff. And that's that, right? So that's all built. I mean, we even have the search, but we didn't even deal with like typing into the search field. So we're not gonna, what we're gonna do today, I had an interesting request on Twitter, which was to kind of explore like all the Android development buzzwords with Compose, right? How do I use MVVM? How do I use Room? How do I use retrofit? And I think that's actually like, it's a good question. I think those questions are important for any app. And one of the things I like about it is like, if you are a developer working on an existing application and you're already using all of those tools, there's a good chance you won't actually need to change much in order to work with Compose. If you're already using the Android X ViewModel, you'll be able to use that within your Compose applications. And you can do that whether you're using live data, whether you're using stateflow, etc. But it's still good to see that in action. So what I thought we would do today is to take this Bloom app that we built and try to make it a little bit more like a real app, and maybe set up like an MVVM architecture that displays this information. But we could even have it served either from like in-memory stuff, or maybe we can pull this from a Room database. I don't think I'm going to do that today. I think for today, it would be good to just discuss like the MVVM architecture and then how we can use that within like our Compose functions. I hope that makes sense. I hope that sounds interesting. If anyone in chat has any preference on like what screen we use this for, I'm open to that, because I thought about a couple different ideas. You know, we don't really need to set up, thinking at a high level, we don't really need to set up an architecture flow for like this welcome screen. I mean, we could set up something, but it's really just two buttons, and we don't actually lead into like a create account screen. We could maybe show like how to do the login flow and discuss like input and password validation. I think that'd be interesting. I don't know if that's what y'all want to do tonight, or what maybe be more interesting is dealing with MVVM on the home screen. So how do I create a data source that pulls all this plant information and shows it on the screen? Maybe we can show how we deal with like loading and empty states as well inside like a Compose application. I think that's what people would be interested in. You know, let me know in chat real quick if any of you have a preference. I'm kind of at the stage in like streaming some of these projects where I personally have like run out of ideas, and so I kind of lean on those of you who come in here all the time and like, what do you want to learn about, and we can figure out how to build that together. If any of you are interested in the project, by the way, I believe you can do !GitHub, and that should link to this project, so you can find the code that's already there. If no one in chat is feeling eager, I think main screen. How renders adding new stuff on the fly. Okay, that'd be interesting. All right, let's do that. Let's dive into the main screen. So, in thinking about this today, I was also wondering, you know, how, what's the word? I guess where I want to start in this conversation, because maybe before looking at code, it'd be good to have like a refresher on how, like, what the MVVM architecture even is, right? Because also this stream I plan to put up on YouTube, so for people watching there, you know, maybe you're coming into this wanting to understand what MVVM architecture is in the first place. So maybe it'd be good to kind of talk about that at like a high level first. And really, we can do that in like 30 seconds. Just to show y'all what it works. So I'm going to this website, draw.io, which allows us to create some diagrams. And I want to do that to describe all of the moving parts. And I promise this won't get, if you're like anxious, please don't give up on the stream. This will be just like 3 bubbles, but I want to talk through how an architecture pattern works, so we have everything we need for the rest of this stream. Right, so let's create these bubbles, right? We talk in these acronyms. One of the things I don't like about the architecture discussion that happens all the time is like acronyms feel very buzzwordy, right? Like, what is MVVM, MVP? Oh god, you can't read that. Can I change? That didn't work. Why aren't you updating? That's not what I want. No, I don't. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out if I can update this font size or not. Apparently I can only do it after. But one of the things about the architecture discussion, right, is like we have all these confusing acronyms. What is MVP? What is MVVM? What is MVI? Etc. So let's take down this MVVM one and let's talk about what those components are. So we have a model, right? That's the M. The V stands for view, and the VM stands for ViewModel. And let's talk about what these 3 components mean. So you can think of an architecture as a way of splitting up responsibilities in your application, right? One way I like to start the architecture conversation is the implicit fact that we all know but sometimes forget: you can't write all of your code in one file, right? Obviously for readability concerns, but then that's just not scalable. It's hard to maintain, it's hard to update, it's hard to swap things in and out, right? So it's good to split up our code into different files, into different responsibilities. And then that becomes an open question: well, how do we do that? And I have a really great talk I've given before. I can even pull up the blog post. I'll share in chat. If you are interested in, I still have caps on. If you are interested in learning more about the different architecture patterns, I would definitely recommend reading through this post. But the short answer is I personally recommend MVVM. So we're going to talk about how that one works. So let's go over each of these components real quick. You have your model, right? And that is your data source. So this could be a database, a network, file system even. And this class or series of classes should only be responsible for displaying information. Yes, exactly, MVWTF. You have your view component, which is, it displays information. And it's important to note, does not care where it came from. So like your view should just know, I have this information and I know how to display it to the user. I don't care where this data comes from. The view doesn't care if you use a database. The view doesn't care if you use a network, right? It also should, it should not do any, it can handle like input events, but it doesn't do any business logic. So it does not do like validation, data manipulation, etc. Right, so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. Whoops, can I make this bigger so it fits? And then all that other stuff that I didn't mention, that kind of gets lumped into the view model. And that's kind of dangerous because depending on your app, this could end up being like a God class, right? You think this knows how to fetch data, deals with data manipulation. Right, it will deal with like button actions, but then let's say I have like a submit button on a form. What I'm saying is your view should handle that button click, but the view should not do any validation on that data. That would actually happen over here in the view model portion. And maybe, if we do architecture on the login screen in Bloom, that would make more sense. Sorry if I misspoke there. Yeah, actually, let's update that. That's a good point. So displays information, handles, click, touch, etc., events. And then your view model kind of does everything else. Knows how to fetch data, deals with data manipulation, deals with input validation. I don't know what else we could put inside the view model. I don't know if I'm thinking like side effects, like analytics or something. Let's leave that out for now. I think that's a conversation that goes beyond what we're trying to do today. So these are the three components that make up MVVM. State management, thank you. That's like the number one thing this is for. And I forgot it. Yeah, state management is good, and when we do code, we're going to talk about that a lot, because I'm going to show you a really good approach to using like data classes for managing state, and that will be really helpful, especially with a UI framework like Compose. So I hope this makes sense, and of course, let me actually, please hold while my ADHD brain jumps into another thing that I usually do on streams, and I haven't done in a while, but I'm going to do this real quick. I will talk through it so you know what I'm doing. So when I started streaming, I recognized that not everyone would always feel comfortable asking questions. Sorry. What is today's date? April 7th. Asking questions in the Twitch chat. So one thing I did was make a Slido link for like anonymous questions that people could post their questions throughout the stream if they had any. Feel free to go ahead and use that link. Obviously, if you are comfortable posting your questions in the Twitch chat, I'd appreciate it, because I have that always open. But when I hit certain breakpoints in what I'm doing, I will go ahead and check out that Slido link, so that if you have questions you don't want to ask in stream, but you can post them there, and then that way I can still get to your questions. Hope that's helpful. I posted the link there, and then it should run periodically, but there's also a Nightbot command to get those links if anyone needs it back. Sorry about that tangent. Because I thought that was a good breaking point in this quick first discussion, is these are the three components that we work with. And so the next question we need to ask is, well, how do these interact with each other? And we can kind of do that with like arrows, right? So the first connection that I guess I want to talk about is that the view model is responsible for fetching data, right? So the view model talks to the model, requests information, and then the model passes that information back. And I guess, do we want to, I guess we could just double end the arrow. And I guess it's hard to know if you really want to call that two ways, right? But I think it's two ways. Like I call to you and you give me information back. But on one hand, maybe it doesn't come, the model never has a reference to the view model. So actually maybe I'm confusing myself. Let's not do a two-way arrow. We'll just say the view model goes to the data, or goes to the model and gets information. And then we do have this sort of, we do kind of have like a two-way connection between the view and the view model. And this is where the conversation gets interesting. Because this line here, I think some people like to mark it as a dash. It's kind of like a artificial connection. So when I think of like a direct connection, we're saying the view has a reference to the view model, and it can call like viewModel.loadData. It can actually call a function. The view model doesn't do that the other way around. Instead, what the view model is supposed to do is it exposes state via, oh, let's bump this up. Whoop. So it exposes state via something like live data or flow, and View subscribes to it. So the ViewModel itself is never actually manipulating the view. What will happen is the view will listen for updates, and it will know how to respond accordingly. And we're going to see that in code if that doesn't make sense in wording. But it's good to understand, like, that's actually a key point of the MVVM architecture, is that you don't have a reference back to the view. The view model just throws out the state, says here's what my state is, and the view listens to it and responds accordingly. And then when the view talks to the view model, what we do here is, this is where we're going to do things like, you know, notify button clicks, form input, lifecycle events if necessary, etc. So that's kind of the connection there. And this is really short, but this is all it is. I think, again, the architecture conversation can become very complicated. And when you deal with like scaling of apps and really thinking long term, I understand that. But I don't think it needs to be that complicated. I think you can just look at it as these kind of like 3 responsibilities, understanding what each of these responsibilities are and how each of them communicate with each other. And I really wanted to put out this sort of quick flowchart because when I start writing this in code, having this mental model will help a lot. You know, for those of you who were here in the beginning and got to see this. So, hope that was helpful. I'm actually checking. No questions on this yet. But let me know if you have questions about the MVVM architecture before I move on. Oh, also, Virgo, thank you for the follow. An alert should have gone off, but it... Oh, maybe you followed before I started coding, and so the alert box didn't go off. But it should be on. Looks like it's on. We need to pause. Oh man. Alright. I apologize, chat. You know, I'm not even going to switch to my be right back screen. I will be back in 30 seconds. Oh, yeah, hold on. I will answer Suhas's question in a second. Some of the original streams are on YouTube, but after a while I fell behind in updating them. But I'm going to try to be better about that moving forward. I didn't do the one from 2 weeks ago because everything broke in the middle. But yeah, hold on. I will be right back in 1 second. I need to grab something from Prince. Alright, so my ADHD brain has jumped over a lot so far this stream. I'm very sorry. But one thing I'm really excited about is one of my favorite seasonal beers, brewed where I grew up in Michigan, is finally here in New York. It came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and like it takes a while for it to get to New York City, but it is. So I'm very excited. Cheers, everyone. All right, now that we have that, yeah, it was from August, a weekend stream. I think it might be on YouTube. Let's check real quick. Yeah, so there's some study guide stuff. Oh yeah, here's another one. Implementing model view. Hello. So feel free to watch this, but we're basically going to do all the same stuff today, but we're just going to be building it into a Compose application. And not much is going to change from the architecture side, except for basically how that view model gets created and used. But it looks like those of us who are here are good on these components. So let's dive into the code and start talking about that. Okay, so looking at this home screen, I'm just thinking about, all right, let me take a step back. Let me tell you where I like to start when I'm thinking about architecting a screen. So to reference these, one thing that I find as an easy place to start is creating your sort of model layer, because it doesn't have dependencies on anything else, right? It just needs to fetch data. So we can actually build that out. So let's go into our project and let's create a new file. And an important part of building a data layer with any architecture is understanding something called the repository interface, repository pattern. And what that means is anytime you have something that is requesting data, and let's put this on a new branch. Anytime you're requesting data, you want that data service to be behind an interface. And this is really important so that you can create an implementation based on whatever sort of, sorry, please hold. Everything is wonky on my screen. So that you can swap out these implementations. So I can make a data source that uses an in-memory service. I can make one that uses networking, one that uses a database, and be able to easily swap them out. If I have a view model that directly depends on a room database, and I suddenly don't want to use room anymore, this becomes very hard to fix. So it's important to put your data layer, and really this is true of any dependencies, behind an interface. So let's create our plant repository, and let's talk about what that looks like for this home screen. So for now, we just want to deal with the same screen that we already have, but it would be fun to look at some options later where maybe we treat these as two different data sources. We'll have a network request to browse the themes and one to browse the home garden, right? Home garden items. So let's write those out. Let's create one suspension function called fetch themes. And this will return a list of plant theme. That is a class that we defined when we built the app, and it just has like the image res and the title. And we actually hacked it and used the same data class for the home garden items. So for now, I'm not going to change that. I'm going to keep the setup we already have, but we'll still treat them as two function calls. So then we can have fetch home garden items, which request plant theme. There's a question here about how thorough we want to be in this walkthrough, and I think for this one, I'm gonna keep it kind of high level. The reason I just thought about that is this method signature right here, when we think about it, specifically the return type. So I'm saying that every time I call fetch themes, I'm going to return a list of plant themes. And in the real world, that's not always accurate, right? Like I could be requesting, I could get an error. And I think for this example, we're going to say that that can happen. But I think it would be nice to either do like a stream or video or something where we walk through like how we can handle errors in data requests on Android. I think that people would be interested in that. If you're interested in seeing that, we can kind of talk about it towards the end of the stream. But for now, let's kind of assume like a happy path flow here. And let's add some documentation as people find this, and to reiterate what we talked about. So plant repository serves as the model layer for our home screen. This allows the user to request themes and garden items. Oops, I actually wanted to rename this to fetch home garden items. And to clarify, my photo covers this. How do I, there we go. We use an interface so that we can create multiple implementations and swap them out. Hey, no problem, Kenry. Thank you so much for the suggestion on this. Hope this has been interesting so far. So we've created our interface. Now for the app that we're building today for replacing our home screen, I think it would be cool to look at retrofit a room, but I'm going to keep those things sort of out of scope and just focus on the MVVM aspect of it. So the next thing we need to do, now that we have an interface for our model layer, is to create that concrete implementation. So let's do that, and let's call it in-memory plant service. And that's kind of the naming convention I like to use, where my implementation of a repository is a service. That's just personal preference. This is a plant repository, and we'll implement those members. So when we were building the Compose app for the stream a few weeks ago, we made these hard-coded lists of all the data that shows up that has the image, drawable, and the title. And for now, we're just going to have like our in-memory service return those same things. So let's, for here, we'll do return default plant themes. And then here we'll return home garden themes. I guess I called it themes last time. Let's rename this to items. I like items here. So this is our plant service. So that's the data layer. Like I said, it's short and sweet. Have an interface for your data requests and have a concrete implementation. Wouldn't have been so short if we were trying to implement retrofit, but maybe that's something we could do next time. So now let's go back to our overview. So we've created this component. Now the next thing we could build is here. We could build our ViewModel. That's responsible for state management and knowing how to fetch data. Can you use Firebase for this? You could. So the nice thing about interfaces is that you can implement them to do any responsibility that you want. So you could have a plant service that calls Firebase, that calls room, retrofit, GraphQL, yada yada. As long as you're using an interface and you override these two methods, you can pull data from anywhere. And that's why this interface is really important, because let me create the next class to show you, to put some code on the screen to explain this. Let's create a home view model. So we can have a home view model that takes in a plant repository and extend view model. So this parameter right here, this is an interface. So when my home view model starts up, it's going to get some plant repository, whatever you decide to do to provide this, right? But by using an interface, the home view model just knows how to get data, and it doesn't care where that comes from. So we could create like an in-memory version to use for now, but if in 2 weeks the project manager comes to me and says, hey, we need to change this to use Firebase, I can create a Firebase plant service, make it use the same interface, and just replace this at the call site, and then my home view model remains completely unchanged. So this is why it's really important to try and use interfaces for a lot of behavior, specifically on your data layer, so that this class remains entirely unchanged. As long as the plant requests I need to make stay the same, the view model doesn't need to worry about where that data comes from. So the next thing to talk about is, we mentioned that the view model was responsible for state management. and I talked about state being important to help the view be able to render the screen. So the way I like to represent state is using a data class. So let's create a data class called HomeViewState. And let's talk about what needs to be in our HomeViewState. So one way we could look at it, with an app like this, there's a lot of different ways that we could think about like this state, right? Do we want to show loading for the whole screen? Do we want to show loading for each individual sections? You know, I don't have like a spec for that, so I don't know what the right answer is. I think for right now, because we're not, I think for right now what I'd actually like to do is not go into the nitty-gritty complicated state management. Let's actually start by just thinking about the state in terms of these themes, right? And then we can follow up and talk about loading and how to make it a little more interesting. But I want to keep the scope as close to the topic of MVVM as possible without creating a too convoluted example. So I know some of you may be thinking about loading, but let's not jump there yet. Let's say that our HomeViewState just needs to know plant themes. So this will be a list of plant theme. And we could say by default it's just an empty list. And it has home garden items. And so we could have this as our state and we could update it. Like maybe we add or remove items and then our screen would update as these change, right? This is all that we need to put in here for now. So let's document this for anyone who finds it on GitHub. Say this data class represents the view state for the home screen. All of this data, formatted in a way that the home screen can just take the information and display it. So this should already be like everything we need for a plant theme. What we put in here is stuff that the home screen just takes and is able to display it, right? So now that we've created this class, we need to discuss how the ViewModel exposes that. And something you may have heard of is live data, but I believe now that Android is telling people to move away from that in favor of something called a state flow, which uses Kotlin's flows. And to create a state flow, there's actually two lines we need here. A state flow that I just mentioned is something that is immutable. So we first need some mutable way to manipulate our state. So we can do that by creating a private variable. We can prefix this one with an underscore and call it viewState. This will be a mutable state flow and needs an initial value, and we can just give it the default constructor for HomeViewState. And then we need a public state flow that we can expose that someone can subscribe to and listen to. So we'll create a public viewState, and that will be a state flow of HomeViewState. And then we can actually just give it the same value as viewState. So there's a fancy name for what this is called. But basically the idea, the reason we do this is because only the ViewModel should be responsible for manipulating its own state. So the mutable part we want to be private. And then we need to expose a public state that anybody can listen to so it knows how to render the UI. But we want that to be immutable. They can't change this. So that's why we have two lines here. And now we need to update that state with the actual data that we request. So let's create those functions. Let's create one function in our ViewModel for each of the requests that we want to make. So let's make a private function called fetch themes, plant themes. And here we can, well, what we want to do is call get the plant themes by doing plant repository.fetch themes. And then we could say viewState.value is equal to whatever our viewState.value already is. And then we're going to copy it and update the plant themes with what returned from the network response. So, and this is underlined because this is a suspension function, because it could take a while to run this request. So we're just going to take all this and we're going to wrap it in a ViewModel scope.launch. That will create a coroutine scoped to the ViewModel that will load that data. So when we make this request to fetch themes, we're going to update our state. That will then update the state flow, and then anyone who's listening to it will update. We can think about this as this will cause the view to re-render. And we haven't gotten to building that yet. We'll do that very soon. So let's make the other function that this screen needs to do. Fetch home garden items. And this will actually be the same thing. Plant repository that fetch home garden items, and then update the state. So the copy method is a really nice method on data classes that says take all of the same information and then only manipulate any of the properties that we override. So this is a good way to just update individual pieces. So if we were to run these two calls in parallel, which is what's going to happen here inside the init block, you know, if home garden items returns first, then those would display first, etc. Now in this app, because we used an in-memory service, our data should show up almost instantly. But once I finish this initial MVVM setup, we can look into sort of loading for each section and maybe play around with having them return at different intervals and see what stuff would look like. Cool. No other questions right now. So that's for the home screen so far. That's the ViewModel. So let's document what we just did. The home ViewModel takes in a plant request data, massages that data into a home view state that can be exposed by the view state flow, so in order for the view to render the relevant information. So that's the ViewModel. That is this part of our flowchart. It's good to know that, you know, this was the exposes state that we mentioned, and we didn't need to add any functions for like button clicks yet, because our home screen in this app doesn't really do any of that. But maybe, again, it's something we could look into, like having our ViewModel handle these check marks or something. So let me know in chat or in Slido if you have any questions on that. I'm going to commit this code so far, adding model and ViewModel, because now if Henry is still here, this is the interesting part of the stream, which is using this inside Jetpack Compose. And there's a couple considerations to make here. Specifically, let's go look at our home screen composable. So we have this is the entry point to our home screen that has a scaffold with the bottom bar and the home screen content. And there's kind of like a question here about how do we get this function to reference our ViewModel, right? We could pass in the ViewModel as a parameter. We could look at requesting the ViewModel right inside the function. I kind of looked up what other people have done, and I've seen both approaches. So I like the coin dependency injection library, and with coin I can actually request it from inside a composable function like this. Another way I've seen it done, though, is passing it in through here. And both pose a kind of interesting problem, specifically when it comes to the preview functions. So down here, we have this preview that shows the home screen preview. Actually, let me do a little split so you all can see the preview if it renders. But to talk through, like, hypothetically, the problem we could run into, that's, you know, I can't, from the preview function, I can't create an instance of the ViewModel here, right? So what do we do? So here's the answer that I do have for that. And if you look at the Compose docs, they'll talk about this, but they'll have something called, like, the technical term they use for it is called state hoisting. And that's basically creating two composable functions, one that works with the ViewModel and manages your state, and the other one that just takes in whatever the current state is and knows how to render it. So I would say let's try and build it that way. So let's start by saying that we have home screen takes in a state, which will be home view state. Right, and then what we need to do is we need to pass this down, and let's make this a default value for now. Just actually, no, let's leave it. And now we need to pass this down into all of our composable functions so that they can render stuff accordingly. So like home screen content, we're going to need to update that to accept the state. So let's go in here and we'll update this to take in a home view state. Now I'm going to ignore some of the code that's already here because we've talked over it, but do interrupt me if you have any questions about any of this Compose code and I can go on a quick tangent. But here we have this theme section. Let's, instead of passing in the whole state, we could just pass in the current themes, right? So we can pass in state.plantThemes. And for the home garden section, we could do state.homeGardenItems. And then we'll of course need to update each of these. So this will take a list of plant theme. And now we can reference the themes from our state rather than have this be hard-coded to what we had before. Hope that makes sense. I kind of went fast through this because for me personally, I think that this is kind of just understanding standard Kotlin code. Once we have the state, we take it and we pass it down to all the functions that need it. But do let me know if I can reiterate any of this. But we'll do the same thing here. We'll go into home garden section. And oh yeah, already happened to refactor because of the name change. So now we have a home screen that can accept a home view state and render it. But now you can see here, if we go all the way down, our preview function is giving me a lint warning. Now if you can see that, but it's because we need to pass a state. So let's create one for the preview. Let's do home view state. We can say plant themes are default plant themes. We can still reference our hard-coded lists and create the preview. So let's do a refresh of the preview just to make sure this still works. It looks like it did. So to show one way we could, I am going to, so this is our actual main activity class. This didn't compile because main activity is not passing in a home view state. We will hook this up with the ViewModel, but for now, to appease the compiler, I'm just going to pass in a default home view state because I want to look here at the preview function first. So I want to use this to verify that our preview still works. And actually not just the preview, but to verify that given some state, this is able to render correctly. And I don't know if it's hard to see, I know my face will cut off some of it, but it looks like this does render correctly. And the way we could test that our preview state is being rendered correctly, to be 100% sure, is we could do something like, we could take like 2 items from home garden items. And if we refresh now, we should see this list on the bottom be just 2 items instead of however many. And it is. So this is a good way to use the preview to verify that it's rendering this state correctly. So that's the first step, is having a composable function, scrolling back up to the top, having a composable function that just takes in some state. Red Label 1, thank you for the follow, I appreciate it. A composable function that just, I should move the alert box. A composable function that just takes in the state. But now we will need one that can work with the ViewModel. Now, thinking about naming conventions here, ideally I would have like home screen be a function that takes in a ViewModel. So I'm going to rename this, and it's not the best naming, but it works for me in this context, is I'm going to call this like home screen scaffold, because that's the root thing here. I'm not going to rename the file. We're just going to rename this function. And so now what I'm going to do instead of that is create this a composable. Let's call this one home screen. And here we can have this composable take in the home view model. Now within composable functions, we have another state keyword to think about, which is an actual class that is, let me show you. We can have a current state, and we can get this by doing home view model dot view state, and then use this extension function called collect as state. So what this will do is this gives me something called a state home view model. And this is a compose class. And what this, oh, is that not it? Oh. So what this state is it's a way for Compose to keep track of some value, and every time this value updates, Compose knows that it needs to re-render the screen. So we can put that inside the home screen and say, the naming and flow is so weird. We can put this here, and this is basically saying that every time the view state changes on the view model, we want the home screen to re-render. And that's great. So this is where we could do something like check if we're loading to show a loading indicator or an error view. Here, we're kind of always assuming success right now. So we can take this and we can just then call home screen scaffold current state dot value. So now whenever our state updates, the home screen will update. So that's how we use a view model inside a composable function. But the next step is figuring out how to get that view model inside of it. And now this is something that I'm admittedly kind of still working through. I would love to blog about this, so keep an eye out on my Twitter for a real blog post, but let me show you a quick solution for this app. And I'll explain after I do it why it's not a good long-term solution. Because you can create a view model here inside the activity. But if the activity is managing all of these screens and I have a lot of view models, this is going to get ugly really fast. But what we can do to start is we could, say home view model home view model. And then we can actually do, I think it's by view models. And then here we need to give it the view model factory because our view model takes in some parameters. So we can do object view model factory, view model provider.factory. We need to override a create method. This gets nested real fast. For those of you who are familiar with dependency injection frameworks, they will solve this, but I'm keeping those out of this conversation for now. But once I get through explaining and using MVVM, if we want to look at individual solutions, I'm happy to do that. So if you have like fun questions, exploratory questions, hold on to them. We're almost to the point where I'm happy to do that part of the stream. We need to define the repository. For this use case, we're going to use a in-memory plant repository, or in-memory plant service. And now here we can do return home view model, plant repository is equal to repository, and then we need to do as t. Oops, not that. I'm going to suppress that for now. So this is a view model factory. This is a lot of code just to basically use this. All that code basically boils down to this statement right here. Return a home view model. So now what we can do is, when we create our home screen, we can create a home screen with that home view model. So let me scroll up so we can hopefully see both of those pieces together. So that's a short solution, is creating the view model inside your activity or fragment, wherever you're using the compose view, and then pass that view model into your screen like that. And then your screen will observe the state. Let's make this private now. Observe the state and it will update. So let's put all that to the test. Let's run the app and make sure it restarts and that this worked. Yes, that's a really great question, Red Label. And let's do that next. Let's make sure this works, and then I'll show you how we can do that. Let's click in. Okay, and that worked. So there's our home screen. So yeah, that's a really good question. Let's build that, and give me just a second. I'm going to commit this code so far. Adding to home screen. Do let me know in chat or on the sliding link if any of you have questions about what we just did. But that's a really great question, and yeah, let's do that next, because I think that's really important to understand, because that's what we're going to do in real applications. Right, so let's think about, for this example, how we could show something. And let me show you a way that we could trick that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do two things to build us a quick reproducible case. I'm going to go into in-memory plant service, and when I'm fetching the themes, I'm going to delay for 5 seconds. And I'm only going to do this so I can simulate a loading time. Okay? And I'm going to go into main activity, the other thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to change home screen to my default, or my start destination, so that when I want to run the app, I always start at home screen. And so let's look at just those two changes, and let's see what that does for our application. And we'll probably see something interesting here. So for a few seconds, you'll notice there's no themes section at all. And then it shows up, and then it renders. So I think a great example for Red Label is like, what if I want to show a loading state while this is happening, before I show the real data? Now if we want to get fancy, we could show a loader just for this section. What I want to do is let's build a loader for like the whole screen until we fetch both pieces of information, and then we'll show the actual content. I hope that sounds like a good example. I think that will answer your question, so let's build that. The first step in that, before compose, think back to the architecture conversation. How do we portray to the view that it needs to show loading? Well, that responsibility would be inside home view state. Now, one way I could do it is to make like a show loading property on the data class itself. We could also, when dealing with view states, use like derived properties. And for this contrived example, actually that's what I want to use. So I talked before about it's a little confusing to think about, well, what if one of the plant loadings failed? But let's assume they can't fail, right? One way we could know that if we need to show loading is if both of these lists are empty. If both lists are empty, that means we don't have information yet. Or if one of them is empty. So we can create a variable here called show loading. This will be a Boolean. And when we get this value, this will return if plant themes.is empty or home garden items.is empty. So that's how we will know on our home view state if we are loading or not. So now the great question, how do we show that? Well, the question was one composable or another. So let's create a composable. I thought I made, oh god, oh, whoa. I thought I made a live template on this thing I was trying to make a private composable. I thought I had that as a thing, but sorry. One thing I have noticed with this projector setup is that my trackpad is very sensitive. This moves very fast. I apologize for the motion sickness. I may have just caused all of you. But let's create a composable for home screen loader. Now, I had to do this on another app, and I actually want to go find that code because I can't remember how we did that. Ooh, we got a new follow. Studio JLVA, thank you for the follow. Alright, I am going to briefly copy and paste some code real quick. Nope, that didn't work. I also have trouble pasting code inside here. What I want to do for the home screen loader, I first want to make a box that takes up the whole screen. And I want to do that because I want the loader to appear in the middle. So we'll create a box that takes up the whole screen. And then we'll put in a circular progress indicator. And we'll give that a modifier as well. We want it to wrap content size, and then we want it to align to the center of the screen. So that's how we create our loader. Sorry, that was not smooth typing all that out between like all the highlighting and everything. Please forgive me. But now we've got a great question. We know how to create a loader, so now we need to know, do we show the loader, do we show the content? Well, one way we can do that is actually right here, where right now we're showing the content. Let's copy this. Whoops. And we can actually just put an if statement right here. So we could say if state.show loading, we put home screen loader, else home screen content. Now I think actually to be consistent, I should pass in the padding values to the loader so that the loader renders correctly. For those of you who missed that section and you're wondering what padding values is, here we're using a scaffold Yeah, please check it out on YouTube. I'll upload that. I think Twitch tells me I have to wait like 24 hours, but it will be up there by this weekend for sure. Um, when we're using a scaffold with a bottom bar, um, this bottom bar creates like padding that we need to think about. So this lambda gives us the padding values. Without this, our loader would actually be like bottom to top, but I want the loader to be considered from sort of top of this bar to the top of the screen. So we'll accept those padding values so we can use those. We could use that on the box, we'll say. Okay, so let's refresh. Red label, I hope this answers your question. You can really think of, I mean, composables are just functions. So it can really boil down to just using like conditional logic to determine whether or not to show something. You can use an if statement like this. You can use a when label, whatever works for you. A for loop even. You could use a for loop to populate a column or a row. It will be on Twitch, yes, but Twitch gets rid of them after a certain time. So now let's run this and we should see, look, there's a loader. It's very subtle, but it's there. And then after 5 seconds, we did it. We got the loader. So that's how we can use the view state to conditionally show or hide some logic. And if you use a view state for not even just for the full screen, but if you used it for like an individual item, you can use that to style text colors. You can use it to change a font size, whatever you may need to do. I hope that answered the question in a good way. I will close this real quick and I'll run it again if someone wants to see it. Yeah, of course. Thank you for that question. Cool. So I'm checking the other site real quick if anyone had any questions. Doesn't look like it. So I'm happy to keep going, but this is a good kind of pausing point. That's a great overview of the MVVM architecture and how it works in Compose apps. One thing I really like, and I want to reiterate from the beginning, that walkthrough was, in case anybody hadn't really seen it before, but for those of you who have existing apps and you're learning Compose and you're thinking about how to add this to your future projects, there's a good chance you already have an Android X ViewModel that exposes view state, either as live data or as a state flow. And this goes to show that your work to add that to Compose is putting the Compose work aside. I'm going to say one line, right? It all boils down to this. Taking a view state, converting it to a Compose state, and then using that to render. You don't need to change anything about your app architecture to work with Compose. And even if you're using a architecture library, something like Mavericks from Airbnb, I know that they're actively working on Compose tooling for their libraries so that you should be able to take whatever architecture you have and add it with Compose. And so there was a really good question too about like, well, how do we use like Room and retrofit with Compose? And really the answer is like, it's not different. The work for creating a data layer with Room or with retrofit, putting that inside of an interface that we talked about, that doesn't touch the Compose code at all. So all of the knowledge you have for data requests, data management, you don't need to change any of that for Compose. The only thing that updates slightly is obviously the view part. The UI framework is all different. And a little bit about hooking up the ViewModel to that view. But a lot of the other code that we have in our applications will remain unchanged, which is really exciting. So you know, I think for now, I'll open it up to see if anyone in chat has like an interesting challenge, you know, challenge for me or challenge for this. Like if we want to try and add a little feature, a random thing someone might be interested in learning about. And what was an idea I had? I thought I had one. I can't remember now. Inject ViewModel using Hilt. Do you want to? Do you want to see if we can pull that off? I think Hilt is really popular. Would be good to know how Hilt works with Compose. So I asked the question. I guess I gotta oblige, right? Let's find it. ViewModel Hilt Jetpack Compose. Let's see if we can find some docs on this already. I think that we can. Ah, yes. I think I tried this before. So this is actually a this line. Oh, but I think it gets worse when I highlight. Sorry. I think this is the thing that I was looking at before. So, oh, actually, interesting. I think that I misled everyone with my factory method earlier. This sounds like it has nothing to do with Hilt yet. To use the ViewModel, oh, no, I guess I still need the factory, but this is showing that I could create a ViewModel inside of the Composable, rather than inside the activity. Let's try this first, just because I'm curious. So to do this, we need the lifecycle ViewModel Compose artifact. So let's get that. So I don't think we have that. 1.0.0 alpha 4. Okay. Let's copy this. Let's add that real quick. So we're going to add this lifecycle ViewModel Compose artifact. And we are going to take the ViewModel code that we put inside our activity, and we're going to shift that to be inside the home screen composable and hope that it works. Because I personally would say that I prefer that. I would prefer to have the composable function for the screen be the one who creates the ViewModel, because it keeps these other classes more slim, right? And we don't need to have them worry about creating ViewModels when only this one function right here cares. I forgot. So one bug I have in this projector stuff is if I do Command X to cut something, it doesn't actually, oh my god, it doesn't actually copy it to the keyboard. Command C does work, but Command X doesn't copy it to the keyboard. I think this is be equal and not. Oh. Key? I don't know if I need to. Alright, I'm just looking at the function signature. So we need to define the factory as its own. See, why didn't that work? Command C. What the heck? It won't paste the code. I don't know why. So this is a projector bug. We can deal with that later. I am just going to type this all out. repository as T. And yes, I am using projector, and I'm finding a handful of weird issues throughout the stream, but it's mostly going well. So now we can say home view model. Oops. So we could say equals view model. We need to give it a key and a factory. The key can be null. The factory is the one we just created. Bionar, thank you for the follow. I really appreciate it. Close that preview. Okay. So this function is a activity lifecycle compose function. Let's try that. Let's run that and let's see if that works. And that's another way. So if this does work, this is a good step in not having to pass in the view model to the screen, but letting the screen create the view model that it needs. This would definitely be my preference. But looking at Hilt would be nice and probably makes it even simpler. And it looks like that did work. Nice. Good suggestion, Suhas. Let's commit that, but then I guess if we're looking at Hilt, we can also look at that next. Or at least look at the docs and decide if I want to go down the rabbit hole. Huh. So we've looked at Hilt before, months ago. It looks like the only thing that Hilt would give us over what we already did is that with the annotations of like a Hilt view model and add inject, we would get the information and then we could just call equals view model. And the nice thing about this is we don't need to create the factory ourselves like we just did. Hilt would do all of that magic behind the scenes. So that would thankfully trim down some code. But I think the time it would take to set up Hilt is probably not worth diving into. But for anyone interested, I will share those docs. If you use Hilt in your apps, that's good to know. But that was a good question, though. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that I looked into it so I could find this. Because now main activity is still very slim. And it's just the home screen that gets the view model. So what are other state... I'm wondering if there's other state tricks that we could do. I don't know. Here we go. I read that you can store the state object in memory by using the remember composable. Right. Even retrieve the value after process death with remember savable. Interesting. Question is, would it make sense to build an app around this and just get rid of the view model completely? No, that's a great... I know we were talking about MVVM, and I was just wondering. No, that's a great question. And I'm kind of at the point in the stream where I'm happy to do this sort of AMA thing. So, anything's on the table. If you want to switch away from Compose, happy to talk about anything. That was a good question. Even retrieve the value after process death with remember savable. Would it make sense to build an app around this and just get rid of the view model completely? So I'm not familiar with like the remember savable. I have seen the remember, and I'm curious how that works. I mean, that probably helps over like configuration changes. Actually, that would be a fun thing. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to hit. That would be a fun thing to test on the loading screen. Like, does this work right when we switch orientation? It looks like it does. Cool. I just wanted to test that that worked. The reason I'm hesitating, I kind of want to say no, and more specifically because the ViewModel does a little more than just state management, right? Like the ViewModel, it's also making like network requests, and the status of like a network request is not persisted in like remember savable, at least not that I'm aware of. So like you still want a ViewModel that survives like configuration changes so that any processes that it's running would keep running, for example. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm sure the Compose team built it for a reason. So there might be a use. I'm inclined to believe that there is a use case where it is preferable over a ViewModel, or maybe it's good enough and easier than a ViewModel, but I unfortunately don't know what that is. But I'll think about that, and maybe I will try to get the answer for you. That's a really good question. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer right now. It's kind of like off topic for the stream so far, but another thing. Remember, we'll prevent recomposition every. Interesting. Yeah, so that's a good point about the recomposition. So that's a portion of Compose that I want to learn more about, specifically the like recomposition, right? Because the way we have this app built is we get the current state, and then we call this home screen scaffold with our current state. Well, what happens if we wanted to change this and let's say only the theme section changed? I don't necessarily want to recompose the whole UI. I only want to recompose a portion of it. And I think that under the hood, Compose does some work to be smart enough to do that, but I don't know if the way I built it plays into that. I also don't know how to get that answer. That is a thing about Compose that I still need to learn about. Throwing it back in my brain as yet another blog post idea to understand that recomposition. If any of you are ever interested in diving into Compose at a very technical level, like looking at the Compose compiler and understanding how Compose works itself, a person named Leland Richardson, they also I think this is their handle. Wow, I'm a stalker. They also like to stream on Twitch, and they work at Google on the Jetpack Compose team, and they usually stream on Twitch. And they dive into like the Compose compiler. They can be really fascinated, so definitely check them out if you're interested in doing a deeper dive into some of this stuff. So, yeah, I guess I'm happy to keep chatting, ask random questions. I don't know if there's other stuff to add here. We can if people are interested and want to keep hanging out. One thing that I have been wanting to explore with Compose is input validation. Specifically around like if I have like some text input and I want to like show an error message or something, and like what does that look like? And I looked at the Jetpack Compose samples, and they do something that is like Galaxy Brain text state management, but I was really fascinated by it. If y'all are interested, we don't have to build it, but we could talk about it. I could pull up the samples and show you what I just meant there. Oops, I'm checking the slidey link. No, nothing yet. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. I just realized I was on the wrong screen for the slider the whole time, but no one has sent a question, so that's good. If we were to look at Jet Chat, for example, let me find there's a file. Oh, so they have this class called text field state, and this is really fascinating. So they created this text field state class where you pass in a lambda for testing if the text is valid, and another one for seeing if there's like an error. And then it keeps the text as immutable state, keeps information about whether or not it's focused or whether you should display errors, and then it updates unfocused, it updates showing errors, but it updates in real time to know, like, do I have an error? Do I need to display it? I guess you'd have to look at the call site, but I spent a little bit of time diving into the Jetpack Compose samples. Oh, you can't read any of this. I'm just talking out loud. I really gotta get better at that. I'm so sorry. But yeah, it's very like interesting to dive into their code. The one thing that I love Google samples, and one criticism I will have, and I also have this issue, but I know I need to work on it, but I try really hard, and like you saw me do this sometime on stream, a few times on stream, is like, you know, comments like this, even if it's just a paragraph explaining what that file is for, goes a really long way for people who are trying to use your public code as guidance. Like when we look at this Jetpack Compose sample, like they don't really give us anything. Like this comment here, was the text field ever focused? I guess that's helpful because I don't know what this means. But like there's no other comments in here. And if I was trying to understand how this worked, I'd really have to like sit down and reverse engineer all of it. And I know that some of the work I've done also falls under that category, so I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here. I'm really saying it as something that I as an individual need to work on, but that all of us collectively can work on. I think that's really important. I think it goes a really long way. Documentation is something that's really important to me, and I try to always focus on it. But I think maybe in my next stream we could focus just around text. I think it'd be like a good stream/blog post. I also have this really great idea of a short YouTube video I want to make on on this topic, on how I go through the Jetpack Compose code. Like me personally, how I look at it, how I deal with that sort of overwhelmingness of looking at source code to understand how stuff works. Because I think people will often, if we go like here, I think often what might happen is people might be like, I want to understand how scaffold works. So they do like a little command click right here. And then this is very overwhelming. This is a lot. And if we didn't write this code, it's very hard to understand it. And, and then there's all these docs. Like, I definitely get that. So I thought about doing a short video on, like, how I approach that and how I find that helpful. Good question, Hallie Written. One thing I'm wondering after watching some of your streams, why does Jetpack seem so powerful compared to non-Android Kotlin UI DSL? Also, why is this still scrolling? I'm not touching my trackpad anymore. I think this is tangent. I think it's because this file is so large that Projector doesn't handle scrolling well in super large files. So we're gonna close. Oh god. Okay, we're good. I think. So I have not used any other. Oh man, I really screwed up Projector here. It's just doing its own magic. I have not used any other Kotlin UI DSLs. I'm sure maybe what you're thinking of is like what was that one called? Anko? Is that the one? Um, oh, it's built by Kotlin. I didn't realize that. Oh, they archived it? Um, so this is a good question about like why Jetpack seems so powerful compared to those. I don't know if this answer is correct, but my technical hunch is that like Compose, as I understand it, is it's kind of rebuilding the UI framework from the ground up. Like, we all know that all of the views that we deal with now, even new ones like constraint layout and motion layout, they ultimately bubble back up to the God class view.java, right? Like, they all use the same old ecosystem. But Compose is brand new. And my understanding of, like, Anko, for example, was a DSL wrapper around that existing UI framework. So when you look at something like Anko, the way I would think about it as like maybe not just syntactic sugar, but that's probably why it doesn't feel more powerful, because at the end of the day, it's the same tool that we're writing in XML, just a different approach. But Compose is different, right? Like Compose, it's not the same tool. Like it is like a whole new UI framework, and it was built with a lot of these new capabilities in mind. Making motion easier, making animation easier, making modification and styling easier. Um, Compose was built to be able to support like dynamic styling. But if Anko really is just a wrapper around like existing tools, then dynamic styling's still not a thing. So I think that's my, I'll admit, kind of like a guess as to why those tools don't feel more powerful, because I don't want to say because they're not, because Kotlin is powerful, but at the end of the day, like, it's using the same tool. So that's probably why it never felt like it was giving you something new. But that's what Compose actually is giving us. That's my understanding. Would love to hear anyone who has like a different opinion or experience with that. But I love answering y'all's questions. I know some people love to do like AMAs on stream. I don't know if people would be interested in that. Like doing a sort of just chatting, talk about my experience as an Android developer. If y'all are interested in that, I'd love to do one. Also happy to do it now. Like I said, I don't know if there's more to code for tonight, but I'm happy to answer any and all random questions people have about anything Android. I guess I'll wait a little bit, and then when there are no more questions, we can sign off. After this, I'm gonna go enjoy Season 3 of Rocket League. New update hit last night. Although I have had like an issue with the network on my PlayStation 4. Can't figure it out. But every time I play Rocket League, I have really bad lag lately, even though our internet is fine. Also, if there's anyone in chat who has been here for the whole stream, I want to know, were there ever any hiccups? Because Streamlabs is still telling me that I have 0% dropped frames. And that is like incredible. And I'm really glad that I set up Projector if it's working well. I didn't know that Google was going Rust on AOSP. If Prince is still here, I'm sure that would fascinate him. My roommate Prince loves Rust. Awesome. I'm so glad. I don't know when I'll get to it, but I do plan to release an explanation on how I set up Projector. So I think one of the... So there's... We could talk about Projector real quick. So... Interesting. Is that my stream, or is that a Twitch setting on your end? I never actually set... I don't know if I have that setting on my end, but... another question before we go here. Any Google I/O predictions? I don't have any yet. I think I/O is too soon to say that, like, they'll announce Jetpack Compose stable. But Interesting. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out. I'll look into that. Maybe there's more I can do. I haven't looked into a lot of streaming stuff, but that's good to know, and I'll see if I can improve that. Um, yeah, I don't have any IO predictions right now. That's a good point. I think IO is too soon. Yeah, I think IO is too soon for there to be like any compose stuff. Same thing with Android 12. It's possible that like actually even with Android 12, I don't think they'll give us like a launch date. I don't think we get that until the fall usually. I have no idea. This is a good question. I mean, also part of it is like, I mean, not just because IO is virtual, but IO is virtual because there's been a lot going on in the world. So I don't know if like Google has been able to make fancy new products or tooling like they normally would. Um, but I don't know. Maybe that will be the biggest surprise. Maybe they'll announce something that no one was ready for. I have no idea. I hadn't even thought about it, honestly. Um, I hope that next year we can all meet in person. I have actually never been to a Google I/O. Last year was going to be another chat app. Yeah, exactly. Last year was going to be my first Google I/O, and then, well, y'all know. It's kind of sad, but I would love to see it one day. You were at 2019. How was it? Don't say that. It won't be the last one. Oh God. Don't say that. Yeah. There were a lot of conferences I was supposed to go to last year. Um, IO, uh, Kotlin Conf. I was going to go to that for the first time. I was going to go to Android Makers in Paris. I am really impressed by a number of conferences, how they were able to move to a virtual solution, and it actually worked really well. I spoke at a couple virtual events. Uh, yeah, I would love to see the Googleplex. Like my bucket list item is to see the Android statues. Like I really really want to see those. I've been fascinated with them sort of ever since I've been an Android developer. Um, so for those of you here, while I'm thinking about it, because I had the thought and I wanted to get like chat's input on this. So this is a really great post by Joaquin on setting up JetBrains projector. And I'll give you the TLDR, which is I'm in the US, yeah, but I'm on the other coast of California, so I can't go anytime, but it is a little easier for me, of course. But if I was on the same coast, it'd be easier. But the TLDR on setting up projector is basically you create a virtual machine or some cloud instance. You install Android Studio there, you install projector, and then you run projector. And it will render your IDE at some endpoint, at whatever the IP address is, on some port, and then you can view it. So I found this helpful, but something I personally struggled with was like, you can use any tool for a VM, right? Google Cloud, AWS, etc. But I personally, as a mobile developer, I didn't know anything about that. So the hardest part in all of this was me figuring out how to set up Google Cloud. So I'm actually wondering if it's worth it to do like a YouTube video where the first 5 to 10 minutes actually walk through that. Like, first, how do you set up a VM? And then how do you set a projector on that VM? Because I wonder if there's other Android developers like me who don't know anything about setting up a VM. I'm like, sure, just focusing on the projector part would be helpful, but maybe not enough. Um, So there's two ways to access projector. To your question, do you access it using the browser? You can. The reason I didn't do that is because they haven't yet set up like credentials on mine, so I didn't want the IP address to be visible on the stream. But you can access it through the browser, or I'm using a native client that JetBrains built. And when this client starts up, I put the IP address in there and then launch it. Um, it's my understanding that one of the benefits of the native client would be that they can proxy keyboard shortcuts better. Um, but like instead of the browser intercepting those keyboard shortcuts. But I had a couple issues with keyboard shortcuts today. Can you also run emulators there? So the VM that I set up doesn't support emulators. Um, I think the short answer is Android Stadia. uh, I think the short answer is no to can you run emulators? Partially, well, so the VM that I set up doesn't support, it's not powerful enough. Like, I tried to create an emulator in, like, the AVD manager or whatever, and I couldn't create one because it needs, like, some hardware specifications. I also don't know, even though there's, like, this emulator window, I don't know if Android Studio would be able to, I don't know if Projector itself can render the emulator window. Maybe someday, or maybe someone could figure that out. The solution I've used is I'm able to connect my device. Basically, if you use SSH at a certain port, specifically the port that's also running ADB, then you can connect the two devices. So that's how I'm able to run a debug onto my own phone, even though this is running on a virtual machine. I don't know, like, if you had your own cloud setup, like, if you could use an emulator, like, if the machine supported it, but I still think you would run into some issues. I just want to say I appreciate the two of you for hanging out, and I am also, like, slightly fascinated that the people who are most active in my chat, like, aren't here on the East Coast. Like, the time zones right now are very wild because Trax, it's like, what, like 3, 4 in the morning, and Suhas is like gonna have lunch soon or something like that, and it's evening for me. Yeah. Wild. So I can actually, it won't expose any information on this script. So let me share this with y'all. Let me walk through my setup briefly. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, okay, so this doesn't give any information. So here's a script I have in my computer that starts this. So, wow, I appreciate all of you, like, night owls hanging out with me. Um, I know, I mean, I guess even though it's like a standard time for other East Coasters, it is also like after work, so I'm sure people are tired, they haven't eaten yet, so that's probably why. But I need to look into either more streaming slots or maybe try some different tools. But that's why I'm really glad I can put the videos up on YouTube. So here's a script I have in my machine to start up Projector, and I'll just kind of walk through why this works. So one thing is, I don't know if you absolutely need this, but it was recommended from Joaquin to kill the ADB server before you connect your devices. And then start it up again, make sure your thing's there. Then I start my virtual machine, if it's not already running. And then I SSH into it, and I use this SSH flag to connect on port 5037. This is where ADB runs by default. So this is basically the magic of connecting ADB on that machine. And then once I get into that machine, I run a script that's on the machine, and that script, basically all this does is it runs like Projector run Android Studio. And then once that's all done, I can get the IP address, plug it into the client, and ta-da, we have our IDE. So I will definitely I would definitely love to share that setup. You know, definitely check out Joaquin's post that I posted in the chat. They are definitely the trailblazer here. They even show how they like are able to open up Android Studio on their phone. Like anywhere that can render a browser can render Android Studio. You can run it on an iPad. But very cool. They're definitely the trailblazer on there. But I always find it helpful to sort of provide an individual perspective and maybe talk about like some hiccups that I found in this process as well. Yeah. Trying to move them out of my machine, same as projector. Oh no, so this this screen that you're seeing right here is using something called screen copy, and is basically rendering my Pixel phone right on the it basically, yeah, it's called screen copy, and that's effectively what it does. I believe I could start an emulator. Yeah, like Visor. I believe I could start an emulator and do this same trick, because it's even an emulator uses ADB. I haven't tried, but that would be interesting. Another thing that's fascinating is, like, well, it's anything that's ADB, right? So actually one day I set up wireless debugging with ADB, and so then I was able to run Android Studio in the cloud and have that cloud instance run an APK on my phone over wireless ADB. Like, the future is crazy. That was so cool. Just that alone, I was super excited about. And after having built something all night, Projector's pretty good. Had a couple little hiccups, things I might go report on their issue tracker, but pretty interesting. Yeah, wireless ADB is great. My drink is gone. Now I can finish my soda. Oh, the secret is do not disturb. There are plenty of notifications, but not that I ever worry about it, but like, I feel like the one time that I stream my phone and I'm not paying attention is when a friend is gonna send me an inappropriate meme or something, and I just don't want to set myself up for that. So do not disturb. And I don't remember when they switched it, but I love the recent versions of Android where do not disturb actually hides all notifications. Way back when it was like do not disturb, it only got rid of like the vibration or the alert sound, but they were still in the notification tray. I like that on do not disturb, they're just like gone until you press this, and then they come back, We're almost at the two hour mark. Maybe I'll hang out for 8 more minutes while we have questions, and then at the 2 hour mark we call it a night. Yeah, of course, thank you for coming. Thanks again to some of you who are subbed to the channel. I know I've talked about I want to do a thing where the revenue from Twitch the revenue from Twitch, when I get it, I want to donate it to some tech organization. I haven't figured out where. I'm open to suggestions. But with that, if you see it on other channels, when you sub to a channel, you can get like a little badge next to your name. Like Suas has the cool founder badge that says like first, but streams can have customized badges for their subscribers, and I recently commissioned some. I'm hoping to have them this week, so next week I can share off and tell you what they were. I'm actually really excited to share the theme, but yeah, prematurely sharing it. I don't know if they'll be ready next week, but I'm excited. Actually, I think there aren't other questions. That's late for y'all. We can call it a night. Thank you again for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I'll tweet out when this video is live. Let's change this back to welcome. And as always, let me know if you have suggestions on stream ideas, This one was something I winged together. Hope it was good for like winging this together in a couple hours. Um, but ooh, one more question. Last one for the night. Tools like Compose before being released to the public are somehow enforced inside your teams, or it's up to you if you want to test it. Good question, Trax. Let me answer that before you go, if you don't mind. Um, so it's usually individual teams that decide if they want to explore things before they're released. So all of the Compose work that I've done has been on streams on my own project. I'm not currently using it at my like work job, although because I'm loving it so fast, I'm actually tempted to try it for my next project. Um, but usually it's within teams. A lot of companies tend to. I feel like a lot of beta testing happens at the individual level. I think a lot of companies are afraid to buy in because of the fact that it's not stable, and if something breaks, that usually means like money is involved. Like if your app breaks and you lose revenue, that's a bad thing. If I'm building something on stream and it breaks, then like no one's hurt, you know. Um, but it's up to the team, right? If a team is interested in taking that risk, then they can do that. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for teams and individuals who are willing to do that, because without people who are willing to test stuff and provide feedback, we would never have these tools to begin with. Um, you know, I'm glad I'm testing out Compose, but sometimes I feel bad that I haven't taken the handful of issues I've had and like reported them back to Google, because those sorts of things are actually what really drive things forward. I've done that a few times with Kotlin, actually, and it's very rewarding to see things introduced into the language that like I had struggled with. I was like, cool, I helped move this forward. It's a very rewarding feeling. Um, yeah, thanks for that question. Y'all follow me on Twitter. Hit me up there, or I know one of you has reached out to me on LinkedIn. Anywhere you want to reach me, anytime you have questions, I'm always happy to chat with all of you. So, thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.